differently every night, but it's the same every night, if you know what I mean. I mean, there are obviously moments, there are things that change from night to night, but basically you're talking about the music is strong, and the thing I go for really is to get a relationship with an audience, and I think the humour is very important, because that way people relax if they laugh and they enjoy it more. And it also shows that you are a normal person and that you're not, you know. I mean, I remember seeing, we were talking about Queen earlier, but I mean, I remember seeing Earl's Court concert in London with Queen, and Freddie came out there with a glass of champagne, you know, and said, "London, I toast you," you know. And those kids never tasted champagne, some of them, you know. And it was, I mean, there's two aspects. There's one sort of the untouchable stars, you know. Or there's the people that are actually like, you know, not working class heroes. I don't mean that particularly, because I mean someone like Springsteen is probably that. But just normal. I mean, so that's more the category that I tend to end up in.
I see myself, before being a guitarist, as a writer. That's, I think, where my strength is, and where my originality, if it's there, comes. And therefore, being away from Genesis for a while is fine, because I get back and I sit down and I write, and that's really the bit I enjoy most of all.
All right, getting on to your solo projects, what were you looking towards as far as your solo projects?
Well, once again, this break time you have is important, because you can actually go away and you have a chance to work with other musicians. You get the minute you work with other people, you get different influences, different ideas, different things come to mind. It just happens in a different way, and you automatically learn things all the time. Therefore, you come back to the band a different person and a different musician. With Mike and the Mechanics, though, what happened again was that I had quite an important moment when I realised, before I did this album, that firstly, I wasn't complete on my own, in that I needed someone outside, like Chris Neal, the producer, who came in, and he chose the material. Now, that was the biggest change of all. That's why the album has come out a lot stronger. And that is actually what Phil and Tony do for me in Genesis. We have this kind of, we kind of bounce off each other, and their kind of feedback pulls out the best of me, and I do the same to them. And realising that made the whole album feel a lot easier.
Well, I mean, like, with Small Creeps Day, I mean, it seems as if, just that you did no vocals, yet the next album you then deigned to do vocals. It was almost, it's like these bashful singers are coming out of Genesis.
I didn't deign, I felt, that's the wrong word, I felt as if I ought to, because it is odd. I mean, I feel it odd too, when someone does an album and he's not the singer.
Yeah.
As a solo album, because the voice is always, in its own way, it's the most important thing. It's what you hear, it's what kind of gets a certain emotion over, and the character. And so, having done Acting Very Strange, and me singing, which, I mean, I'm sure I think I made some other songs work, but as a songwriter, I want the best voice in the world to sing my songs, and it's not me. I mean, I'm not being bashful, I just know it's not.
All right, so when we come down to Mike and the Mechanics, and you've been quoted as saying that Genesis in the early days, even though you did write singles, or you were consciously writing singles, that you felt that they weren't being played because they were too long, DJs wouldn't play them, etc., etc. What, when you're working with your producer, who was co-writing with you, and Brian Robinson, what were collectively the three of you looking towards?
I think I don't actually look in quite that way. It's slightly more
That sounds a bit silly.
It's more out of control than you think. I'm not in control of it really. You're writing songs, and it's true with Genesis. What comes out comes out. And every time you try and say, let's go in that direction, it never works. You end up way over there somewhere. I just wanted to have a mixture of good melodies and rhythm. That's all I'm ever after, really. And I mean, we felt our way. I mean, I went in the studio and the producer was saying, what are we going to do about vocals? And I said, well, I'm not going to sing it. But I said, I've no idea who we should use until we get the tracks down, because I've no idea what they're going to sound like.
Right.
I really hadn't a clue, because my demos are so rough. I mean, it could go anywhere. It's all written down, but just how it's going to sound. And so it wasn't until we recorded the backing tracks that I realised it was a mixture of strong songs and some quite heavy bits.
All right, so where did you do the demos? Did you do them at home in the studios, or
Yeah,
where?
I did them at my house. I've got a little mini studio.
Okay, so Christopher Neal becomes the producer and one of the co-songwriters. Was he the one that insisted that you go elsewhere and not go into the Genesis recording studio?
The Genesis place. In fact, I may have gone elsewhere anyway. Genesis was being rebuilt in time for the Genesis album, so I couldn't use it. But I think he was keen to get me out of my sort of, my habitat, my little safe niche in the world, to somewhere different. And he's got a good point there. You know, when you're in a foreign place, you feel less sure of yourself sometimes, and more easy to sort of try new things.
So what made you pick Air Studios in Montserrat?
He's been there for 3 or 4 albums.
Right.
And I wasn't going to do it. In fact, he was on about it, and I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And then I woke up one day and it was pissing with rain, and I looked around and I suddenly thought I was going to spend 3 weeks near Hastings, which is on the south coast of England, which in February, March is pretty depressing. So I suddenly thought, what the hell, why don't we go somewhere? If we're going to go, let's go somewhere nice. And it worked out very, very conducive to work. It's fantastic.
Going one step back then, I mean, your choice of musicians, and how did you go about that?
Well, I started with Peter Van Hook, the drummer, who I didn't know but I knew of. You know, when everyone keeps saying, you must use Peter, you'd love him and he's the right kind of guy. I've been hearing that for about 3 years, I was sick of it. So, and Kristen knows him very well. I booked him, and Adrian Lee, the keyboard player, I knew from before, as a sort of whiz-kid keyboard player. So just myself and the two of them went to Montserrat, and I thought, we'll get the tracks down and get the sounds going, then you know what you're dealing with.
Right, so just looking at the progression, had the songs been written by you and Chris and Brian by the stage?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, at least 2/3 of most songs were there.
Right. So then you go to Montserrat, and you come to the recording side. Now, how much influence then did a new drummer and a new keyboard player that you're working with have then on the songs?
Well,
on you?
Yeah, I think lots, but at the same time, you kind of do it together. I know what I'm after. What I tend to do is you get people who've got good ideas, good sounds, and talented, and you point them in a direction. And the trick is to let them go off and try this and try that. And if it's going right, I don't say a thing. If it's not going right, I've got certain parameters in my head that I know I want. And you let them sort of wander around in between trying to find the right thing. So that you're pushing them forward rather than saying, no, don't do that, do that, you know. And I give them a lot of room, I think. But at the end of the day, I always knew what I wanted, so you're trying to get the best out of them without squeezing them too much.
Right, now when the two Pauls came into it, was that Over there or back then in London?
Back in England, we got back.
At Air Studios?
Yeah, and we had the, it was a mixture of working in, part of our studio was working, so we did a few vocals and a few overdubs there, and then up to Air Studios. And it was a mixture really of sort of people coming down, and I had a few other singers too, came down and tried things out. And we were just trying to feel our way with what sounded right on the album.
Right.
And Paul Carrack came down, who I knew from before. He nearly sang on Small Creeps Day, I think, actually. And I've forgotten why he didn't. There was a reason, but it didn't happen. And Paul Young, I didn't know. Someone recommended him. Chris Neal's manager recommended him. And they both came down, and all you can do is someone comes down, you sing them a few bars, they try and sing it, and you can tell in the first 2 minutes if it's a song they can really do or not. And they cracked a couple of songs straight away.
When did you then start seriously thinking about that being a group?
Well, as we finished
and
the
where
album...
did the name come from?
I'll answer part one first.
Part one, right.
As we were finishing the album, I was thinking to myself, look, there's a bunch of guys here who get on awfully well, actually. They've all got time in their lives to do this kind of project. And at the back of my mind, I was clocking, thinking, not necessarily touring, but just thinking that it feels like a nice situation for everyone.
Mm.
So I was thinking if it was to get going a bit and take off, I'd like to, I hadn't even thought about touring, I'd just like to continue it.
Right.
And it wasn't until the album actually happened and did very well, initially it was in America first of all, that anyone thought about touring, I even considered touring. Because I needed that input from the audience, the punters, saying, hey, this is nice, to get the energy to go out and tour.
Right, so then the album's about to be released and you're facing the press and they're saying, all right, here's Mike Rutherford with his new group. You've got Phil Collins doing this, Tony's doing that. And one of the obvious questions at that stage was, well, is Genesis broken up?
I was very lucky here, actually, because at the time it was released, I was just about to start recording Genesis.
Right.
So I could actually say that to people, which made my life so easy. If I'd have had to do every interview saying, hey, don't panic, it's, we're going to do another album.
Yeah.
And they go, oh yeah, it wouldn't have been so easy. But I could actually say to them, look, we're in the middle of, we just started recording a new album. It was a sort of tangible thing to say, so that side was relieved. But then the album came out, and it came out in England first. Died of death, complete death. Nothing happened at all. And I must admit, we didn't give it much of a shot, actually. And then it came out in America, and it just seemed to take off. It was silent running, got going in the AOR stations, and suddenly you got a sort of vibe going. I mean, the single was about, well, I wrote down 4 minutes, but it wasn't. It was a bit longer.
Mm.
They probably find out, but and a lot of guys played the longer cut. The album version was 7 minutes, and there was a sort of 5.5 minute, and people seemed quite happy to have something that, it's actually quite a simple song. It just goes through quite a few mood changes and atmosphere, and so many songs these days are kind of pow, zap, short, sharp things that on the fifth listen I've lost interest in.
Right.
That's something that just was a little bit more laid back, a bit more atmospheric. People found it relief, I think, actually.
inside the doorway.